Maybe I have an addition to the same thing. I have this meditation today, and it was pretty scary. I begin to meditate with loving kindness, and I mean, for a couple of years it was pretty peaceful for me, and then suddenly I see a lot of scary images. So maybe somehow it's connected to suffering.
Okay. Well, this is the Saturday morning call, and it's for the U.S. We have one in California, one in New York, and David is here on the island here in Thailand. So it's half U.S. and half Thai. So, David, you had a question, and Anna, the question is related. And when the statement is life itself is suffering, that's not what the Buddha taught. Okay? In the sense of the second noble truth is the cause of suffering. Is that not true? And what is the cause of suffering? What is the cause of dukkha? Is greed, ill will, and ignorance. And so I want to make sure that we discuss it in the sense that it is true that life itself is suffering, in the sense that in order to remain alive, you've got to perform your duties. If you do not perform your duties, you will be in great pain, you will get really sick, and then you will die. And so maintaining life has requirements to it. And the question is, do we not like to fulfill those requirements? If we don't like to fulfill the requirements of being alive, then that's dukkha. But really, the dukkha is not from being alive itself. It's actually, in a way, not performing our duties correctly to the Dhamma. Life itself is not suffering, and if you believe that, David, do you have a pistol handy? Or can you jump off of? No, there's no place to jump from in Onkopangan. All
There's
right.
three stories here. I think I could injure myself.
So, one thing that you could possibly do is just stop breathing. You could hold your breath, but I've heard kids try that, and when they pass out, they start to breathe again. The body will take over that function. So, one of the things that we can do, though, is to try that, holding one's breath in order to die, and find out that we get into a very, very, let us say, perplexing state of the body itself demands to have that breathing. Another point would be that if I brought a gun right up to your head and gave you the choice, you can either die this minute or wait 5 minutes, would you choose to wait 5 minutes? Or maybe I can have you prisoner and say, okay, you can die today or you can die tomorrow. Would you prefer to die today or give it another day and die tomorrow? All right. Here's what I'm getting at with that. I'm getting at the point that we actually love life. We want to remain alive. That we like it when we can extend the lifespan. That in fact, very, very few countries have a high suicide rate. Japan has a high suicide rate and has for centuries because of the concept of Bushido, which basically means it's better to die than to fail. But failing is a kind of a death anyway. We don't like to fail. We don't like to have things screwed up. So we can then come back to the point of that it's not life itself that's suffering, but everybody in life does suffer because they want to live. They have greed for life. And we do that ignorantly. Can you wind up doing it wisely? Can you start living your life wisely in the sense of everything is okay no matter what happens? That if you live, you live, you die, no problem either way. And we come out of our greed for it, but we still, if we're going to remain alive, we've got duties. The primary duty that I mentioned a moment ago is you've got a duty to keep breathing. And sometimes breathing is labored. Sometimes it's hard to breathe. Sometimes we don't like breathing. Sometimes we don't like the air that we're breathing. If we're in the wrong city, like Beijing, or in the early 70s, in Los Angeles, where they had what they called smog, a yellow haze everywhere, caused us to breathe badly. We also have to eat. There's many things that are required to remain alive, but Bhikkhu Buddhadasa points out something completely different than that, but it's the same thing in a way. And that he says that we have a duty not just to stay alive, but we have a duty to the Dhamma. And when we fulfill our duties to the Dhamma, there is very little or no dukkha. And one of the ways that I can see that is that part of my duty to the Dhamma is to spread the Dhamma. And I gain a great deal of joy by doing that. I enjoy doing these calls. I'm glad to see you guys when you come onto the calls. I like having friends in the Dhamma. So we have kind of a duty to the Dhamma, but we can look at it in a different way also, in the sense of the duty that we have in the Dhamma is to take control over our lives, to take control over our feelings, to learn to feel the way that we want to feel, rather than feeling the way that we feel ignorantly, not knowing how to feel, and therefore the feelings run our lives. That in fact you could say then that the feelings run our lives in the sense that our feelings drive us to do things. We don't like pain, so we're driven away from it. There's things that we do want, and we're driven to go get them, and we're driven because we are ignorant, and so we sort of give in ignorantly to the whims and desires. Now, we could say then that it really has a lot to do with one's attitude. And we can have, basically, the attitude we can look at in this case is the attitude of, is life itself suffering? Or is it that life itself is something that I am willing to put up with and pay the price because the benefit is higher than the cost? The cost-benefit analysis of life is that we would choose life. Isn't that true, Alexander? That the cost-benefit of being alive, you would prefer to be alive.
I think so. I think that's true.
And we're willing to pay the cost. We're willing to pay the price. Yemen, good to see you. So, we've been talking about the issue of the question, is life itself suffering? And I just mentioned that there is a cost benefit. And so there is an amount of cost. We have a duty to stay alive. We have to eat. We have to protect the body. We have to breathe. And so my question to you, Emin, is, are you willing to pay the cost of staying alive?
I mean, I'm here, might as well, why not?
Yes, exactly. All right. So that whole point is that yes, there is a cost to being alive. Are you willing to pay that price? And so, David, that Achan that was talking to you and saying that life itself is dukkha, he's talking about it in the sense that there is a price to pay. But the question is, are you willing to pay the price? Are you happy to pay the price? Or are you reluctant to pay the price? So, and I would say that offhand, everybody goes back and forth. Sometimes we feel like a nut, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we feel like I've had enough of all of this, and sometimes we have the attitude of bring it on. And so we're not fixed in one particular place. And so sometimes we see then that life itself is dukkha. But in fact, I want to mention this, is that back in the 1980s in the US, there was a common bumper sticker, a very common one. Perhaps some of you remember this bumper sticker. It says, life is shit, and then you die. Have you ever heard of that phrase or seen that sticker, Alex? How about you, Anna? Have you ever seen that one? Life is shit, and then you die. Right? That's the basic point of life is dukkha. But there's a choice in there. And that is that why, if life is shit, don't we have mass suicides? I mean, as soon as a child is old enough to get a gun at about the age of 4, he can just blow himself away. But often when we have children with guns, they go and harm other people instead. People who want to live. And then not only that, but if everybody was in that position, the human race would kill itself off. I've heard, in fact, people talk about, well, about becoming a monk or becoming a nun or taking on the religious life. And then the question is, well, if everybody became a monk or everybody became a nun, then the human race would wipe itself out, not having any more children. And yet look at the population of the planet Earth. There's now, I hear, it's gone over 8 billion people. And not one of them wants to die. But sometimes they commit suicide because they have done so much damage in their life, like that issue in Japan of Bushido, failure is worse than death. And so it's actually then, it's the failure that they're trying to avoid, but they would still prefer to be alive. Would you agree with that, David, that you would prefer to remain alive?
Agreed. I agree, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are you willing to pay the price?
Yes.
All right. Are you willing to find it, in fact, that the price is easy to pay when you know how to pay the price?
Mm-hmm.
And then life becomes much easier because we have the knowledge of how to pay the tax, how to pay for life. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So actually then the issue is not life itself is dukkha, but that it's the second noble truth. What is the cause of dukkha? And most obviously, though I have heard in the Mahayana tradition, they talk about that attachment is the cause of suffering, cause of dukkha. But clearly that's not the case when you read the Four Noble Truths. That it's not actually greed or ill will that causes the dukkha. It's the ignorance of when we're having greed and having ill will. Because we don't know how to pay the price easily. If we have the knowledge of paying the price, then we're quite willing to pay the price and stay alive. So, what is then the knowledge that we need? Well, it's the knowledge of how we feel. Because if we know how we feel, we have a choice about it. But in fact, this is possibly one of the most important teachings that there is, in the sense of why it's so hard for people to really gain value out of the teaching of the Buddha. You know that, in fact, that many people will read books and read books and read more books. They'll get interested perhaps in a foreign language like Pali or whatever, and they'll learn the language. They do translations. They call them scholars. And often the scholars are valuable in the sense that they keep the teachings alive, but the scholars themselves are still caught up in ignorance. They don't know how to come out of it. That in fact, if they knew how to come out of their dukkha, they wouldn't be writing books anymore. That all the books that are written by people who want the solution to the problem about how to have an easy, comfortable life. So be careful about what books you read, because almost all the books you read are written by people who are still asking, while they're translating suttas and writing books, they're still asking the same question that you're asking.
Wait, you think if they knew how to come out of their dukkha, they wouldn't be Pali scholars or anything like? No.
Well, let us say that if someone becomes a Pali scholar and then gets the secret, he still kind of remains a Pali scholar in the sense that he's got all of that knowledge, but he doesn't write any more books. And so because of that, in fact, the real teaching of the Buddha has already been written. It's been written down for 2,500 years. But we have the Tripitaka, which is a vast amount of stuff. We have one book, the biggest book of all, by the way, is called the Jataka Tales, which is only a bunch of mythological stories, often about the Buddha before he was enlightened, or past lives or whatever like that, which means that it completely misses the point. The same thing is true about another vast part of it called the Abhidhamma, which kind of misses the point. You could say that the monks who were actually looking for this one secret that we're talking about, they sat down and wrote the Abhidhamma hoping to find that secret. And so we have all of this literature, and people still don't have that one secret. And basically, I'll tell you again, and then we'll go into it. The secret is to come out of our ignorance about our feelings. And if we are wise to our feelings, then we have a choice to calm down our feelings or to do with them the way that we want to. That in fact, the way that children are trained in our society, every child grows up not able to manage his feelings. And so somebody else will say, oh, calm down, or don't be angry, or shut up, or whatever like this, because we are never trained on how actually to manage the feelings. And so let me give you an example, or start with this, okay? Imagine that you have a bruise or a wound on your arm, and somebody comes and touches that wound, and you don't like it because it's painful. But if they had touched you on the other arm, or touched you and there was no wound there, then it would not be painful. So this is an important point, is that it's not the touch that causes the pain, It's the wound that causes the pain when it's touched. Does everybody understand that concept? All right. So what we could say then is that we're all wounded emotionally. And because we're wounded emotionally, whenever we are touched, we don't like it. And so we say, oh, don't touch me, don't insult me. We will argue with people because we don't like the fact that we've been touched. Well, the point is that we don't like how we feel. This is the ill will. We don't like it. And the ignorance is that, oh, we got touched, and we don't like getting touched because the wound is sensitive. The ignorance then is, don't touch the wound. And the wisdom would be, let the wound heal. If the wound is healed, then there is no ill will, there is no blame, because the touch wasn't painful. Can you get that concept? That what we really need to do is to heal the wound. Well, the wound itself, then, we could go so far as to say the wound is actually an attitude. We have the attitude that we've been wounded. And what that attitude then is the attitude of being a victim. Don't touch my wound because it hurts. And so I blame the outside world for the pain that I have, where in fact the real issue is that I haven't healed old wounds. And I have been ignorant all of this time, thinking that, oh, I have to protect that wound. I have to protect that thing because I don't like it when it's touched. Well, we could actually then go so far within the teaching of the Buddha is that wound that we're talking about, that emotional wound, is actually the self. Anatta means that there is really no wound there. We just imagine that there is a wound, that we have been wounded, or that we're in danger of being wounded. What is that then? Well, that actually means then in childhood, every child, by the way, is born as a victim. No child fresh out of the womb, a day or two old, is ready to conquer the world. In fact, a tender infant can't even manage his health. You've seen children in cribs with mobiles above them, and the eyes will follow the mobile, but the child, the hands are not capable of grabbing and grasping. But in fact, we've got some new puppies here at the house, and when they first came, their only issue was suckling, sucking and sucking and sucking, and they'd suck on anything. Now that they've got teeth, they've gone from sucking to chewing. And that's all that they know how to do. All right, so as a human child, when we are born and starting to be raised, we start off in that helpless position. We get into the habit of being in a helpless position. By the time that we're 2 or 3 years old, we're beginning to be ordered around. In fact, you've heard possibly, and I know that Anna has heard of this concept of what's called the terrible twos. That's when a child learns to say no. The child learns to say no because he's already coming out of the victim's position. No, don't touch my wound. They call it the terrible twos, where they also call the little 2-year-old a tyrant because he wants his way. He's trying to protect his wound. Okay, so the child gets a little older and goes to school. And now the child is put to work. Learn your ABCs, learn your 1, 2, 3s, learn what we're teaching you. And every child, you remember this if you can remember back, that you didn't like going to school. You didn't like doing what you were told to do. And so we get into that habit of feeling like a victim. We feel like we're wounded. We're feeling like that we're sensitive in the way of capable of experiencing pain. And this is the attitude then that we grow up with. And the whole teaching of the Buddha has to do with coming out of that sense of feeling wounded, because that sense of feeling wounded is ignorance. That in fact we are all capable of being happy all the time, no matter what goes down. But we need to train the mind for that, because we have already trained the mind into being ignorant. We've trained the mind into giving into those feelings and let them manage our lives in order to avoid feeling wounded. Yes, David, you had a question.
I'm not sure. My Ajahn, he would say, he would never give us the solution to becoming unwounded. He would just say, like, life is suffering, and basically that's it. You can't do anything about it, but make some merit. So then maybe your next life you will have a better chance to come out of your suffering.
All right. Yeah. Well, isn't that next life going to be just like this one? When does it ever end?
I don't know. We should ask him.
Well, the story then is that people do Tom Boon in Thailand. Much of Thailand, by the way, is still not really the teaching of the Buddha. Most of the Buddhism in Thailand is still the old animism, especially in people's attitudes. And the animism that was in Southeast Asia and South Asia is the same teaching that Hindus have, okay? That what we need to do is to tambun, to make merit, to do things in this life so that the environment of the next life will be more heaven-like, where we can get something. But the teachings of the Buddha, in fact, there are sutras where it talks about the fact that being in the state of a human is the best balance. Because if you're in hell, all you have is the suffering, and if you're in heaven, that you don't actually see the value in making a change. And so back then is that, oh, I want to be reborn in a place where I can protect my wound and it's not being touched. But the wound, that ignorance of the fact that we're wounded, that we're a victim, that in fact the whole teaching about rebirth and reincarnation is that we're a victim. And what are we a victim of? They say it's the past, which is actually true. And then they also say that we're a victim of our own bad behavior. That's why we want to do Tom Boone, to put in some good behavior, and so to mollify the situation. All right? And in fact, the situation is often created by us. In fact, everybody creates their own situation. When you recognize that you create your own situation, now you have a choice about it. That when I recognize that I create my own situation, guess what? I wind up in paradise because I created the paradise. You're on this island. I live on a paradise. I mean, David, you've come to the house. You know that this is a paradise. But I created that intentionally because I knew that I had a choice about it. And so if we can then recognize that, oh, we create our environment, you can also then see how people live the environment that they're in because they're driven ignorantly by their greed, their desires, that the, let us say the Maserati that's in the yard is there because of my greed for that car, right? This is an important thing is that we create our reality. And we create it in both the mental state and also in the physical state. We create the physical state out of the mental state that we have. And so if you have the mental state, like that Achan is saying, that life is shit, and then you die, and then you're reborn to a life of more shit, and then you die. But this time it's not quite so much shit. And so it gets better and better, but it's still a life of shit. And then you die. Go ahead, Aaron.
I suppose it depends on how long your life is. It could be 5 minutes, could be a second. You're reborn again and again and again.
Well, the question then would be, how long does it take to wake up to our ignorance?
Whenever you remember.
Yeah, that we can recognize that we do have control over our feelings. We can choose to feel the way that we want to, but we choose to feel the way that we want to out of old habits. That we just automatically choose to feel the same way. So, the 14-year-old kid who is, let's say, has to deal with the bully, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth time he deals with the bully, he feels the same way he did the first time, only it just deeper. It's the same feeling. He doesn't really change his feeling about the bully. And then when we grow up, then we find all kinds of bullies. The IRS, the cops, governments, thieves. We all see them as bullies, and we don't like them because we were in the habit in the first place. Well, the answer to that is, why don't we get away from the IRS? There's no IRS here on Kopangan. So that's the way that we can look at it is that we do have choices about the environment that we create. And if you can see the environment that you're in as a paradise, then it's a whole lot easier to live in that paradise. But if you see your environment as hell, then it's a torture. You don't like it, but you still cling to life because whatever it costs, you're willing to pay the price to stay alive. That in fact, one of the ways that you can think of it is that in that belief system of rebirth, reincarnation, that eventually you don't come back, right? Isn't that how it goes? In other words, you're willing now happily to be completely dead. I'm not coming back. But in fact, that's something that the Dalai Lama has come to. He's not coming back. He said it publicly. There's actually a political issue around that. Have you ever heard of the Panchen Lama? That was the number 2 after the Dalai Lama. The Panchen Lama was a kid who was reborn in all of that Tulku system that we're kind of discussing here, where the Tibetan monks go up into the hills and find a little kid and then designate that kid as, oh, he's the rebirth of the reincarnation of some whoop-de-doo old Dalai Lama or Panchen Lama or something like that, right? Well, the Chinese government, the CCP, grabbed that kid, the Panchen Lama, back in the 1990s and spirited him away, and now they have either the same kid indoctrinated or they have another one, and they have their own Panchen Lama. And the Dalai Lama knew that the same thing would happen when he dies, that the whatever the Tibetans want to do to replace him, the Chinese government will take over and do with it what they want to do. And so his response to that would be, I'm not coming back. If I'm not coming back, then the Chinese can't steal the kid who's designated as the next Dalai Lama. Well, here's then the questions about that. And that is that if the Dalai Lama is not coming back, and the Buddha has been known he's not coming back, that in fact there's a sutta or two, I think number 20 in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha says, therefore monks do not be reborn. Well, what was he talking about? Was he talking about this rebirth and reincarnation kind of thing? Or was he talking about stop being reborn right now into that state of being wounded? Stop feeling like that you're wounded. Stop feeling like that you're vulnerable. Stop feeling like that you're a victim. How do we do that? Well, that's the secret that we were talking about. And that is that when you see that you are in fact being wounded in this moment, when you see that you have greed or ill will, you can say, aha, I see that. Let's do something about it right now. Let's deal with it right now. Let's come out of the feeling of I'm wounded into the feeling of I'm okay. This is the state then of sukha, which is exactly opposite of the state of dukkha, which means being dissatisfied. So we can come into the state then of being satisfied. Whatever we've got right now is okay. And in that regard, there's some features about it. One of them is that we feel safe and secure. Everything's okay, not dangerous. We're also comfortable. Is everybody here comfortable in the chair that you're sitting in? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Is there body pain? Or can you be comfortable? Okay, so in the state of being away from fear. Now, we often use the word fearless, but I'm reluctant to use the word fearless because often the word fearless has the quality of seeing danger and being willing to go deal with it. An example would be girding up your loins and putting on your battle armor and going out to battle because you've got an enemy out there. But you perceive the enemy as an enemy. And so fearlessness is actually kind of bravery in the sense that you're willing to put up with your fear. But there's another way of looking at it. And that is that enemy is not really an enemy. He's my friend. Instead of gearing up for battle and putting on my battle armor, why don't I cook lunch and invite him in? Okay, so this is the way that we begin to look at it, that we're safe, we're secure. Let's be friends with ourselves and with the world. To become friendly. When we're all friends together, then we naturally have the feeling of being safe and secure. Things are not dangerous. So you could actually then say that wounding is beginning to heal now when we take on, for the moment, just a little moment, the attitude that it's okay. I'm not really wounded. I'm not really in danger. That I can, in fact, be okay right this very minute. And we have to practice that over and over and over again. Why? Because we've been practicing all of these many years, perhaps all of these many lifetimes, as being wounded. And that's our normal position. Our normal life's goal or life position is that things are dangerous because we've got to protect a wound. And when I'm not wounded, then I'm safe. When I'm not wounded, I'm comfortable. When I'm not wounded, I'm satisfied. Everything is satisfying, and when we're satisfied, that's actually the very opposite of being dissatisfied. So when we're in the state of satisfaction, we're not wounded. We need to practice having that feeling of everything's okay, I'm not wounded. Alex, how do you feel right now? Do you feel satisfied or do you feel wounded?
I feel satisfied.
Yeah, that's the whole question is, can we stay in that state of being satisfied that things are not dangerous? I'm not vulnerable. I don't have to protect a wound. We have a guest that's joined us. Emin, how about you? Are you satisfied right now?
I'm neither satisfied nor dissatisfied.
Well, when you say it that way, that's actually a concept, but we don't, let us say there is some place in the middle. But being free from dissatisfaction is satisfaction.
Yeah.
And so that is almost kind of like a binary position. I think that, in fact, that you're mistaking what I mean by satisfied with elation.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. But being satisfied actually means being content, that everything is just okay the way that it is.
Yeah.
And so this is the way that we practice getting into that state of satisfaction. Now, there is actually a state of that wowness or that elation, and that it comes when we recognize over and over and over again that I can be satisfied, that I am satisfied. Wow, I can do this. That that is what we bring on as success, and success is really the opposite then of being a victim. The victim is actually being in a state of not able to do it. And so we live our lives running and chasing, trying to get into that state, but we do it out of a sense of dissatisfaction. Once we get ourselves into the state of satisfaction, then we have that eventually. In fact, there's a sutta that talks about it, the sutta number 49, the Kansambian Sutta, where it talks about that the first real knowledge is the knowledge that no matter how much my mind gets obstructed, no matter what kind of hindrances I have, no matter what attitude I have about being wounded, I can come out of that and come into the reality that I'm not wounded. And that brings on an elation. Wow, I'm not wounded. Wow, I can live a life of joy. That in fact, I am willing to pay the price. For the price of being alive is minuscule compared to the benefit of being alive. So does anybody have any comments about this? Anna, how about you? You're okay with this, huh? The benefit of being alive is greatly outweighing the cost. But for many people, it's hard to tell. Sometimes the cost of being alive is too high because of my feelings, because of the wound is too big. But when you can come out of that sense of being wounded, come out of the sense of something's wrong and needs to be fixed, and come into the state of, gosh, everything's okay right now. Everything is fine. Not a worry in the world. That's the state of satisfaction. And then we don't have to look, oh, I hope it gets better. I'll have a new life. I'll be reborn into a heaven. And then I can protect my wound. Can you do that right now? Can you be reborn into the state of being not wounded? Can you be successful at being continuously, moment by moment, reborn into a state of satisfaction and coming out of that state of being wounded? I see you shaking your head. Yes, David. Tell me about it.
Yes, I agree. I just don't understand though if it's so easy like that, if it's so easy to come out of feeling wounded and feeling satisfied, then why didn't that Ajahn teach us that? Why is...
Because we're in the habit. Okay? We're in that habit. There's an old joke that I have. It's years ago on television, they advertised a kind of tomato juice that had other stuff in it. They called it V8. Have you ever heard of V8? V8 juice? All right. All right. So one of their commercials was the position that somebody would slap their head like this and say, I could have had a V8. All right. So they're at a restaurant and they ordered a Coca-Cola, and somebody else then later orders a V8, and he could have says, I could have had a V8. But he was already in the habit of ordering a Coke. Ivan, good to see you.
Hi, Dhammarato. I'm just listening.
All right. So this is the point that we're making here, David, is that it's very easy to do once you remember. But we are in the habit, for instance, in the habit of ordering Coca-Cola, and we keep asking for Coca-Cola because we forget that, oh, we could have had a V8. But we have to remember that. That's the whole point of the development of sati as a skill, is so that we can remember of, oh, I could smile right now. Or, oh, I don't have any problems. Or, oh, we can fix that. This is an attitude change, but we're already deeply ingrained in the attitudes of what we've already gotten used to. And we have to make a change. We have to practice making that change. And a lot of people in Western Buddhism talk about meditation in the sense that it's got great value. Well, meditation really, if we define it correctly, meditation is the development of the skill of remembering that we're not wounded. And yet many people in their practice of meditation, especially in the Mahasi method, is they keep inspecting the wounds. They keep looking at the dukkha. They keep seeing it over and over and over again and don't ever recognize that, oh, they made that up. Life is shit, and then you die is based upon the fact that you made that shit up. And if you stop making up shit, there is no shit in life. We make up the dukkha. We make it up because we're dissatisfied. We started getting dissatisfied when we were infants. We continued it through childhood. When we got into teenage, we were really experts at being in dukkha. And then we grow into adulthood and we continue that excellence of being dissatisfied. And so we go to school and more school and more school. Why? Because we were told that, oh, you've got to go to school or you'll be really dissatisfied. And yet I would imagine that it's quite possible for somebody to have never gone to school and is quite happy in their life. That some things like school, other things like church, creates greed. We want more and more and more and more, and we're never satisfied with how much we have. And so that's the way that Westerners practice meditation. They're still wanting more. They're wanting attainments. They're wanting bodhisattva. They're wanting stream entry. They're wanting jhanas. They're wanting all kinds of things. They want magical powers. They want spiritual powers. And it's all a matter of greed. Why do we do that? It's because we're trying to protect that wound of being a victim. But when you wind up being the champion of your life, when you recognize that you're never wounded in the first place, that we made that wound up. So we have to practice over and over and over and over again, telling ourselves we're not wounded. That everything is okay. Everything is fine. Not a worry in the world. Alex, can you practice that?
Yes.
Yeah, you can practice. That you're already okay. You're not wounded. When we have the sense of being defeated and wounded, we made that up. The reality is that you're okay. You're alive. We can relish being alive. Ivan, you had a question.
Yes, I had a question on this. I understand we are talking about satisfaction. I have a question about greed. Basically, I try to be aware of it as when greed arises and all that. What happens if, let's say, I'm in a situation when I'm talking to people and people are talking about this entertainment or this or that, and I'm realizing in that moment, listening to them talking about this greed arising. What should I do with it? Should I just be okay with it? Yeah, basically just like, and I have no idea how should I control myself in that situation. Because I'm realizing I'm not satisfied in that moment as I'm listening. Yeah.
Well, we have to actually practice. The practice is to remember that you're already okay, that you're not wounded, that the wound is actually a mental condition. It's a mental thought form. It's an attitude that we have that things are not good enough. Or in fact, everything is already okay.
So it's awareness. I guess in that moment there's also some other thoughts that come into my mind. That the thoughts that says that I need to find a way to exit this situation. I mean, as quickly as possible, because the longer I stay in this conversation, the more I realize that I'm feeling dissatisfied. So I guess it's hard for me. It's almost like I want to find an escape plan, rather than trying to just be okay with it and reminding myself and all this.
Yeah, you actually do want that paradise to do it for you. We, in the earlier part of the conversation, we were talking about that that we feel wounded and we don't want that wound to be touched.
Yes.
And so we want the outside world to deal with our wound rather than us dealing with the wound ourselves, by recognizing that, it's actually It's the I don't like it. I don't like when you touch my wound.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is you've got a choice of treating yourself like you're wounded and don't want it touched, or you have the idea of, oh, I can tolerate that. I can handle that. And when you have that idea, I can handle that, the wound is not that big of a wound. It's already healing. And so having the thought of, oh, my wounds are healing. Oh, I'm not as in bad a shape as I thought I was. This is the practice of coming out of our dissatisfactions into a state of satisfaction. We can do that, but we have to practice it over and over and over again. Just like I mentioned about the V8, we order the dirt when we could have had the V8. We order something that we don't like, when in fact, if we remembered, we can order up the kind of thoughts that we do like.
Yeah.
So that we can become satisfied.
I also realized there's a judgment. Like let's say I'm asking, like the situation that had happened is already maybe an hour ago. I realized a part of my mind still lingers there, as in like, how dare you touch my wound? It's kind of bizarre how my mind sometimes just not living in the present. It's still thinking of what happened a few minutes ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's the whole question that we have. That's actually the secret. The secret is that we have to practice not feeling wounded.
I see.
We have to practice seeing reality as it is, that you're already okay. Or as the Zen masters will often tell their students at the Zendo, the Zazen practitioners, you're already enlightened. Just sit here and enjoy being enlightened, as opposed to sitting here trying to become enlightened. You're already okay. Even if you don't ever get anything else accomplished in the rest of your life, you're still okay. Even if things are broken, you're okay. We don't have to feel bad because things are broken, because you're the champion. And pretty soon you don't look at things like they're broken. You see them as kind of a toy to play with.
Is it okay to say I accept that there's some part of me inside that's broken and I'm okay with that? But I'm pretty sure that's also kind of like a victim
Right, well,
mentality.
that's how we get started. But then you recognize, well, it's not so broken after all. It's not that important. There's other ways to do things.
Yeah.
That things happen. This is actually one of the major teachings of the Buddha, is called anicca, that things get broken. Are you going to handle that with a sense of self, the wound? Or are you going to deal with this sense of, I'm okay. There's no wound there. There's nothing that needs to be protected. That sense of self is actually a sense of the wound. We're trying to protect ourselves. Let me give you a little example of that. Your brother or a close friend or someone in the family comes up and says, oh, I really need $1,000. Please loan me $1,000. How are you going to respond to that? Oh, I don't have $1,000. I'm a tightwad. Oh, I can't afford it. Go and ask somebody else. Okay. So you refuse to give him $1,000 because that $1,000 is part of your wound. And I'd be even more wounded if I had to give up that $1,000. But if I can say, oh, $1,000, that's nothing. Here, let me loan you the $1,000. Now, guess what? I'm feeling generous. I'm feeling wealthy. I feel that I've got the money, and my brother or the family member is happy because he's receiving. He feels grateful. And so everything is hunky-dory when you give him the money. But if you don't give him the money because you need it yourself because you're trying to protect your wound with that $1,000, then you wind up with two people being unhappy. What's your choice? You're going to go around feeling happy and helping other people, or are you going to go around feeling like you can't afford? You can't afford it. You can't get that word afford is a really interesting word because it comes out of the idea of crossing a river. You cannot afford it. It means you cannot ford the river. You cannot go across it. I can't afford that. Why? Because I'm carrying a big burden with me. What is that big burden? It's my wound, myself, my attitude of being a victim. And every time that comes up, we can say, aha, I see that. Aha, I see that. That's the teaching of the Buddha was very strong on that. Aha, I see you, Mara. So, in fact, we're now relabeling that wound as Mara itself. Our attitude that things are too much. That's actually then when you go to life is dukkha, it means that it's too expensive. We can't afford life. The cost ratio, the cost benefit analysis goes into it's cost too much to be alive. And that's an attitude change. Can you change your attitude? That's the whole question then, is can you remember to change your attitude? I could have had a V8. So go around with that attitude of, oh, I can deal with this. Oh, I can handle that. Oh, we'll find a way around it. No problem.
I guess the difficulty for me is sometimes there's still this lingering. Again, I realize that sometimes I'm not living in the present. It's like there's a part of me, you can call it the Mara, that it reminds me, oh, you remember that time you couldn't handle it. And I guess it's almost like fake it till you make it, I guess. It's like, I'm not sure.
Yes, so this is the whole point is that intellectually we can sit here and we can talk in the point of everybody can understand that you're already okay. Right? Everybody here is okay, right? You're already all right. But then when we feel bad, when we want something, when we don't like something, that's when the ignorance comes in. The ignorance is that, oh, it's too expensive. Oh, I can't handle it. Oh, I'm a victim. Oh, poor me. That's the ignorance. Can you catch that ignorance? Can you catch that Mara and says, aha, I see you. Aha, I see the attitude that I'm a loser. Aha, we can fix that. I can take a deep breath and tell myself everything's all right. Everything is fine. And we have to practice that over and over and over and over and over again. How many times have you told yourself, I can't do it? How many times have you told yourself it's painful, it's expensive? How many times have you had to protect that wound? The self. What, 100 million times? 4 or 5 times a minute, every minute that you've lived? So you've done it a lot. You're well skilled in being unhappy and miserable.
Yeah,
We have to remember to practice being well skilled and happy. You have to practice those skills.
So it's like when you're unhappy, you could almost say, I see you, Mara, because the unhappiness is a sign, I guess, like that is part of the Mara.
And then you can remember, I don't have to feel that way. Yes, Anna, go ahead.
What about compassion? So what are we doing? We're looking at the wound and thinking it's okay, or what? It's not. So what is it? Compassion attitude or compassion practice?
In a way, you can say that when you're talking about compassion, are you talking about compassion for other people or compassion for oneself?
As I understand, to begin for myself, and then you need to go to other people, and then you go.
I would say offhand that compassion has to do more with, please don't touch that wound. That's where normal, ordinary compassion comes in. It's the compassion of, oh, don't touch that wound. So compassion really doesn't get to the issue. Compassion is misplaced often. You've heard me talk about it in the sense that if somebody falls into the creek, into the river, are you going to jump in after them? That's what we call a pity party. Somebody is miserable and they come to you and you become miserable along with them. Why? Because both of you feel wounded. But if someone who is miserable and unhappy and he comes to someone who does not feel wounded, then is he going to begin to feel wounded because he's around someone who is wounded? Or is he going to maintain his position of, I'm not wounded? If I'm not wounded, then I can deal with the wounded person completely differently. In other words, if I've got joy and my joy is really strong, then even though somebody is having a pity party, I can join that pity party happily. Oh, poor dear, I understand that you're suffering. But guess what? You don't have to. Now, here's one thing that's very interesting that I have learned. And that is that it's very difficult to teach the Dhamma when somebody is really, really stuck in their dukkha, when they're really unhappy, when they're having a misery. An example of that would be when somebody is physically hungry for food, giving him a sermon is not the best solution. You got to feed him first. And once he's filled with his belly full and he's satisfied, then he can hear the sermon. So often we have to help someone by giving them what they need first and then teach the Dhamma to them. But we have to be careful with that because often what's really going on is misery loves company. So they come to you miserable. They don't like it when you're happy. They want you to be miserable like them. That kind of proves to them that their misery is okay. Just like you've heard about going into a bar. If you go into a bar and you don't drink, some barfly or lounge lizard is going to get you to drink with him. He wants you to drink because that proves to him that it's okay for him to drink too. So the question is, how can you deal with people who are in a misery, in an uncomfortable state, and you remain in a comfortable state? How can you do that? That's a skill that needs to be developed, but that skill will be developed along the path of when you come out of your own misery. When you get your own misery dealt with, because until you do, you're going to jump right into their pity party with them. You're wounded, I'm wounded. I'm not okay, you're not okay. That's the standard position that everybody takes. Can you come out of your wound is the bigger issue, not can you be compassionate for other people who are wounded. Because if you don't know how to come out of your own wound, how are you going to help somebody come out of their wound? How can you get someone else to come out of their position, I'm not okay, when you're also in that position of I'm not okay. This goes back to the Greek statement of position, heal thyself. That in fact, during COVID, we saw that a lot. Is that the people who got COVID, they got sick, they would go to the hospital and made everybody in the hospital sick too. And a lot of nurses that were good, qualified nurses quit being a nurse because they couldn't tolerate all of the illness and all the sickness and all the dying, and also being susceptible to catching it too. So that's the problem with compassion is that the best way to deal with compassion is with help. And when your health is in danger, when the person who is sick is in danger of making you sick too, it's best not to try to be compassionate and try to help them, because they're just going to make you sick, and now you've got two patients. We have to come out of it, and then we can help another person. And how do we do that? The answer to that is the skills that you develop on how to deal with your own discomforts. How do you deal with your own wounds? Then will help you to understand how to deal with other people when you find them wounded. It's not an easy question.
It kind of sounds like there's a skillful kind of compassion and an unskillful kind of compassion, right? The skillful one is the one where you take care of yourself first, something like that.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. So this is the practice that we're going to have. So when you're around someone who is they're in danger of getting sick with the same disease that they've got, that's the time to practice right then. But often we forget. They order up a pile of crap and we'll say, yes, waiter, I'll have that same pile of crap. Whatever they're eating, I'll have it too. And we forget that I could have had a V8. So remember that little gesture that I've got is, wake up. Everything's okay. You're all right. Everything is fine. Not a worry in the world. When you can remember, when you can wake up.
Speaking personally, I realized that the past me love misery is because there's a part of me feels like when I guess there's a huge part of me that scares that when I'm satisfied, I will stop trying to pursue success, whatever that means. It's almost like satisfaction is an enemy of mine when actually it costs me a lot of suffering when I'm not satisfied. Yeah.
Right? We want to maintain our old position. We get stuck in a rut and we want to remain there. Use the example of a truck or a car that is stuck in the mud. That car wants to remain there. It would prefer to spin its wheels and stay stuck. And it often requires some that is not stuck to drag them out of that stuck position. So which are you going to be? You're going to be the one who is stuck in a rut? Or are you going to be the one who has good traction so that you can help other people come out of their rut? We have to practice this because we often are stuck in a rut. The rut that we're stuck in is the same analogy that I'm using of we're wounded, or the same analogy of we have the attitude of a victim. Okay, Alex, I think that we've about covered this topic. We've been at it for more than an hour. So hang on just a second and we'll say goodbye. Does anybody have any last thoughts? David? You have any last thoughts?
Yeah, most people have the attitude that they're wounded. And the teaching here in traditionally in Thailand is that we can't do much about our wound, actually. Is that we're stuck with this wound.
Mm-hmm.
I just find that's crazy.
That's the general attitude of the general population worldwide.
Yeah, it's
That's
crazy.
the general attitude of the general population worldwide is that life is shit and then we die, and we don't even recognize that we made that shit up.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Christianity is based upon that. Life is shit and then you die, but Jesus will help you eat your shit. He knows real shit. I mean, they crucified him. What a shit pile that is. And then he rose out of it. That's the story. Can you rise out of your pile of shit? Can you remember to come out of it right now? Practice coming out of it right here, right now, over and over and over and over again. Otherwise, you're doomed to that pile of shit. Alex, I think you understand this pretty well. You create yourself a real pile of shit, but you have the opportunity to stop doing that. So does anybody else have any last questions? How about you, Anna? No? Emin, you have any last statements to make? Everything is good. Great. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you.
Thank you, friends.